What time I'm going to take a plane. And as the joke goes, the Parkinson's doctor walked into a bagel shop in Montreal at a meeting, and there was Susan Lust waiting. Saying, I've been trying to find you. And so here I am. So I was asked to give a little bit of a initial discussion on what we think about Parkinson's disease. Is it medical? Is it biochemical? Where does it come from? How can you stop it from getting worse? How can you stop it from beginning? And I thought a way of doing this is to give a little view of how some of us think about Parkinson's disease based on some new scientific discoveries that have occurred over the past decade or decade and a half. So what causes Parkinson's disease? Well, let's see if we know that or not. I think I have a... There we go. So we'll try to cover a little bit, that's loud. Is Parkinson's disease genetic? Can Parkinson's be slowed or stopped or reversed? Can it be prevented in people who are at risk of developing it? And what can you do about Parkinson's disease now? I think that's why you're all here, about now. It was about 200 years ago that an English physician named James Parkinson wrote an essay on a few patients he had in his clinic and a few people he saw out the window while he was waiting through the day. And he described this tremor in the hand and other symptoms of slowness and stiffness and slower walking and stooped posture and a lower voice, and also some other non-motor symptoms of trouble with how the bowels work and constipation and anxiety and such. And he wrote this essay, and a few years later, a French neurologist referred to that disease that that Englishman wrote about, that Parkinson's guy, and they called it Parkinson's disease. And since the 200 years, we've recognized how common Parkinson's disease is. It's common in this room, it's common in this area, it's common throughout the world. Over 1 million people have Parkinson's in the US alone, up to 7 or 10 million worldwide. It's estimated as people age, the chance of developing Parkinson's gets higher and higher, such that there may be 1 in 80 people over the age of 60 who get Parkinson's, but about 1 in 60 people over the age of 80. So for me, down in Boca Raton, Parkinson's is really common. We think about the typical movement symptoms of Parkinson's: slowness and stiffness and tremor and low voice and getting out of a chair, in and out of a car. Dressing, bathing is slower, handwriting is smaller, cramping in the foot or the arm or the pain in the shoulder. All these symptoms of movement are typical of Parkinson's. We know that. And we know that we diagnose Parkinson's disease by looking at these symptoms and then doing that examination, looking at the tapping and the walking and the talking and measuring the slowness of Parkinson's. And we can look at certain blood tests to make sure there's not a thyroid problem or another problem, and you can do fancy and extensive blood tests, as Dr. Mitchley will describe in a bit. You can do brain scans and MRI to make sure there's nothing else going on. A DAT scan that can actually show, as this picture does, the loss of dopamine, very bright on top and lower if you really want to see if there's a loss of dopamine, that chemical that was discovered in the 1950s. In the 1960s, we learned how to replace it. So by early 1971, 72, we had Cinemet, which becomes dopamine in the brain and makes all these movements better. And all these things help us diagnose Parkinson's. And as many of you are aware, in the first year or 2 or 3, it can be hard to have enough of these things to diagnose Parkinson's. So it may be unclear initially, but then it becomes clearer as time goes on. We've also recognized over the years that it's not just movement problems that are part of Parkinson's. There's many other symptoms of Parkinson's, and some of these occur even before the movement problems occur. Constipation is very common. They did a big study out in Hawaii, in Honolulu, and they found it was a big risk to developing Parkinson's if you had lifelong constipation. Vivid dreaming, where people act out their dreams and punch and run and jump and is a risk factor for developing Parkinson's. A reduced sense of smell. Some people find they can't smell certain things. Some people find their sense of taste is less based on this loss of smell, is very common. It's a major focus of some of our work looking at this loss of smell. It turns out the 3 smells that go first is peppermint, star of anise, and coffee. And hence you might have seen some of the signs back there working with McGann, one of the advertising agencies in Manhattan, on trying to spread the word of what early Parkinson's disease could be heralded by a loss of smell. And maybe people who can't smell the coffee should look more into Parkinson's. Most people with loss of smell don't develop Parkinson's, but some do. Some people get dizzy or lightheaded when they stand up quickly in the years before Parkinson's is diagnosed. Some people feel anxious or their mood is depressed. Some people have aches and pains in their arms or their shoulders or their legs. And only in a year or 2 or 5 or 10 do we diagnose Parkinson's disease. Because we think Parkinson's disease begins 5 or 10 or 20 years before we're able medically to diagnose it. That's a lot of Parkinson's that's undiagnosed. And if it's causing symptoms, it may be hard to find out who has Parkinson's and who doesn't when these types of symptoms are not so specific for Parkinson's. It's a target of a lot of research trying to find what's called a biomarker. Some blood test or urine test or spinal test or brain test that will allow us to say yay or nay, this is Parkinson's disease. We don't have that now. It's frustrating. It frustrates us all. We need that because as we develop medications to try to stop Parkinson's from progressing, we want to diagnose it before it even begins with one of these biomarkers. Once it's diagnosed, we try to address the motor and the non-motor symptoms. We address them with better lifestyles and healthy lifestyles, with spiritual ways, with eating ways and exercise ways and all sorts of wellness ways, and with medications that tend to focus on the chemicals that are problematic. For motor symptoms, dopamine, and for non-motor symptoms, things like serotonin and glutamate and norepinephrine. There have been attempts to understand when Parkinson's disease begins by constructing pyramids. We talked about denial a few times today. But this is a different denial. This pyramid suggests that some people are born with genes that can predispose them. And then there may be changes in the brain imaging that we can see a loss of dopamine and serotonin and other chemicals. And then people may develop these non-motor symptoms of loss of smell and constipation and vivid dreams. And then they may get a little bit of aching and slowness. And only at the very peak do people actually have enough symptoms that we can diagnose Parkinson's disease. But it's probably going to turn out that this is all Parkinson's disease once we have some tests that can diagnose it and some type of medication to stop it from going from here up there. So for most people, the cause of Parkinson's is not known. We think it has something to do with the genes you're born with and the environment in which you're reared. The environment includes things that you breathe, things that you eat. It may be how you're brought up. It may be how you spend your lives. It's a whole catch basket of things. In large studies looking for some of these environmental and other risk factors, we find things that raise the risk and things that lower the risk. So not everything environmental is bad. Some are good. Some people have found that drinking coffee and smoking nicotine lowers the risk of developing Parkinson's. Some have found that people who are exposed to pesticides or live on farms or have had head injuries in their lifetime may have a higher risk of Parkinson's. Some of these may balance other ones out. Other ones might be additive. So it's complicated. And there's a lot of work going on in trying to understand what causes Parkinson's, so maybe we could figure out how to stop it. For others, though, we know what causes Parkinson's. A lot of my patients, I know what causes Parkinson's. We've discovered over 20 different genes that can cause Parkinson's. Most are very rare. Most occur in younger, under the age of 30 or so. Even when we look at people under the age of 40 and test for all these genes that can cause Parkinson's in younger folks, we only find an answer in about 10%. They're all very rare. But there's one gene that's really important to our understanding of Parkinson's. And there's two other genes that are not uncommon at all and are common causes of Parkinson's. And I want to tell you a little bit about those, because I think it'll give some insight into how we're thinking about Parkinson's nowadays and give a basis for some of what Lori Mishley is going to talk about and how we're all trying to work together. It's not the Mishleys and the Isaacs. We're all working together trying to find an answer for these. So synuclein was the first gene that was discovered for Parkinson's in 1996. This was in a Sicilian family. That family grew as more and more people were discovered. But this gene, synuclein, someone found was a major component of what's called the Lewy body. Pronounced the Lewy body, but it's really a Lewy body. And when we try to diagnose Parkinson's disease 100%, and we look under the microscope of pathology of people who have passed away with Parkinson's, we can see Lewy bodies, and it's made up of this protein, synuclein. And when there's a gene mutation in synuclein, those people get Parkinson's. We can put that gene into little mice. They're called transgenic mice, and they develop Parkinson's. And we can see it beginning in the gut and going up throughout the nervous system, perhaps mimicking constipation and then sleep problems and then loss of smell until they get slower. And remarkably, we now have ongoing in the world right now, including in this country, including my center in Boca Raton, 5 different trials going on aimed at stopping synuclein from progressing and causing Parkinson's disease. We have antibodies that are being infused, we have vaccines that have been developed. There are lots of companies trying to stop Parkinson's by focusing on synuclein. That's a rare gene though. GBA, on the other hand, is not rare. Most of you have been tested for GBA when you got married before you had children. If 2 people are carriers of GBA and they get married and have children, some children will have both and will have Gaucher's disease. It's a bad disease for little children like Tay-Sachs. It's one of those things we're all tested for. We didn't think it had anything to do with Parkinson's. But about 20 years ago, some centers that see a lot of Gaucher's disease found that some of the parents were developing Parkinson's. And we now know that 8% of carriers develop Parkinson's disease. They develop what we call GBA Parkinson's. We're trying to understand it better through programs of the Michael Fox Foundation and the Silverstein Foundation, and trying to understand why do some people with GBA develop Parkinson's and not others. We think the gene causes it in some, but in 92% they're protected against developing it. If we could figure out that protection, maybe it would apply to everybody to try to prevent Parkinson's. And there's ongoing trials right now of people taking pills or getting infusions and trying to prevent the buildup of a biochemical fat in the brain that happens when you have GBA mutation in the gene. So most people now who have any type of possibility of having GBA gene are tested for GBA because we have trials going on to try to slow the progression of it. People with GBA Parkinson's look a little bit different sometimes than other people with Parkinson's and may have more trouble with memory or more chance of developing hallucinations. Makes us think about all the neurological problems that have been discovered in the Ashkenazi population. There are so many disorders. DYT1 dystonia is a big, Gaucher's disease, spinal muscular atrophy, and now Parkinson's disease is part of this as well. I don't have to remind most of you about the migration of being chased and wandering and finding our way to New York and eventually to Boca Raton, as the sign that ends in Boca says. I think it says something on the wall, my people migrated for 5,000 years and wound up in Boca Raton. But this is the problem. When you travel and run away together, you marry. When you marry together, certain genes that can occur spontaneously begin to be brought on more and more. Most people came from certain areas in Eastern Europe, migrating up the Rhine River into the Pale areas and such, and then eventually over here. There are many hereditary genetic diseases in Ashkenazim. It's not just Parkinson's disease, it's cholesterol problems, there's a BRCA gene, It's a whole list of about 25 now. Many of these are biochemical, some of these are degenerative, all sorts of things go awry in the body. So we're not talking different languages with some of the blood tests you had or trying to fix things. We're all trying to work together to figure it out. But it brings up another gene that was discovered 15 years ago, the LRRK2 gene. I thought when I moved from Mount Sinai in Manhattan to Boca Raton, people were seeing me because I was a New York Jew in the middle of South Florida. No, it's because the genes are so common. There's so many genes. So many people have LRRK2 and GBA. We now know that LRRK2 gene is one of the most common causes of Parkinson's disease. And we're doing something about it. There are now medications in humans with Parkinson's trying to address LRRK2. Only about 30% of people who have the LRRK2 gene will develop Parkinson's. That means if you have a LRRK2 gene and you don't have Parkinson's, it's more likely than not that you will not get Parkinson's. And if we could figure out why, we could prevent it in everybody else. That's why it's so important to understand the role of these genes and the role of these new medications. For idiopathic Parkinson's, we don't know what causes it yet. It could be a gene that hasn't been found yet. It could be something in the environment you're exposed to we haven't discovered yet, or a combination. We just don't know. But we're found that medications being developed for GBA Parkinson's and LRRK2 Parkinson's and against synuclein show promise in even people who don't have those genes. And there's now about a dozen different medicines being studied to address different aspects to slow down Parkinson's disease going on right now in this country. In Boca, we've looked closely at people who wanted to get tested for the LRRK2 and the GBA gene. We've done a lot of this work with the Michael J. Fox Foundation, for instance. We looked at about 300 consecutive Ashkenazim who had Parkinson's and knew someone in their family had Parkinson's. We tested them for LRRK2 and GBA. If you're Ashkenazi and you have a family member with Parkinson's, about a 1 in 3 chance of having LRRK2 and GBA as a cause of Parkinson's, providing great hope that one of these breakthrough medicines that are being studied will be able to stop or slow down the disease. Not in the future, but in the next 5 years or so. Of people who didn't have any family history, found out about 1 in 6 people had LRRK2 and GBA. And we found that if you found out you had a LRRK2, most people don't develop Parkinson's, only about 30%. So that's only about a 2% risk, which is only about double 1% in the natural population. So having a gene and not having Parkinson's doesn't have any meaning right now. But having Parkinson's in one of these genes has a lot of meaning for people with the genes and also people without the genes, because all this research seems to apply to everyone with Parkinson's. So that was a little brief introduction I wanted to give, but I want to highlight one last thing at that top bullet there. Over the past 5 years or so, we've had 7 or 8 new medicines approved in this country. We've had medicines approved to make the dopamine last longer. We've had medicines approved to make the medicine work quicker, and that's not going to be swallowed in the stomach that slow like the gut. We've had medicines to treat other symptoms, like hallucinations and low blood pressure in Parkinson's. We have medicines to treat dyskinesia in Parkinson's. We've had 2 new surgical things approved. So there's a lot of work being done on the symptoms of Parkinson's and also on the causes of Parkinson's. So hopefully they'll all come together, because it looks like for people who have genes, people who don't have genes, for people we don't know what causes it, we're on the verge of discovering breakthrough to try to stop this disease, or at least slow it down while we can figure out ways to stop it. So I keep all those things in mind as we talk today about some of the new things coming on, some of the things we know, and how to take everything that's known. Medicines, research trials, and all the stuff Misha's going to talk about that I only understand just a little bit. Abyssal for me, so she'll educate us. Thank you.